Welcome to the Viewless Wings Poetry Podcast, where we celebrate the craft of poetry. Each week, we feature interviews with incredible poets and artists, including Olivia Gatwood and A.E. Stallings, and original poetry read by the authors. I'm your host, James Moorhead, Poet Laureate of Dublin, California, and author of Canvas and Portraits of Red and Gray. This week features the second interview in a two-part series with Daniel Ash and David J., lyricists and songwriters behind Love and Rockets, Bauhaus, and multiple other band and solo projects. I interviewed Daniel and David separately with a similar set of questions. The success of their projects can be attributed, in part, to their distinctly different approaches to writing lyrics and crafting songs. Today's episode features David J., with Daniel Ash's interview published earlier this week. I spoke with Daniel and David while they were preparing for Love and Rockets' first U.S. tour in 15 years. Named after the underground comic by the Hernandez brothers, Love and Rockets announced themselves to the world with their radically unique take on the classic Temptations song, Ball of Confusion. This debut proved that they were going to be a force to contend with. It became a huge seller and a popular club hit in the U.S. and Canada, where it also went gold. The legacy of the band has only grown with more people realizing the extent of their influence and generations of new fans discovering them. The list of artists who cite their influence is impressive. The Flaming Lips, the Dandy Warhols, A Place to Bury Strangers, Jane's Addiction, Black Rebel Motorcycle Club, Beck, Maynard Keen, Dubfire, the Pixies, and many more. As a bonus, David agreed to share lyrics from an upcoming project. David, welcome to the Viewless Wings Poetry Podcast.
Thank you.
I get the sense that writing lyrics is something you enjoy doing, not something you have to do as a responsibility for a band or as a solo artist. In your book, Who Killed Mr. Moonlight, you mentioned being astonished by the incisive beauty of the poetry of Jeremy Reed and later working with him in a recording studio. What are some of the influences that sparked your interest in writing and helped you shape your approach to crafting lyrics?
As far as poetry, the first poetry to really grab me, I suppose, was Dylan Thomas at school. And I was very, very arrested by that, to such a degree that I started to emulate Thomas. And my English teacher took me to task over this, and one time wrote in, I was particularly proud of this poem, but it was all, Bible, black, crow, black, a lot of black in there. And he's scrawled in red, "This is Dylan Thomas, not you, be yourself, see me." So I saw him afterwards, and he explained, and I understood what he was talking about, but that was a big influence. The same teacher was Mr. Elderkin, was our English teacher, and he was very influential. And he was a bit of a maverick. He was one of those classic maverick teachers who would really sort of march to his own drummer. And he wasn't in favor with the other teachers there. He was a bit of an outlier. Mm-hmm. Consequently, he would go off of the syllabus and he'd really introduce things to us that he thought we should know about. To the degree of actually not talking about literature at all, but how to wine and dine a young lady. Things like that are indeed important, But he also, he taught us about the war poets, Siegfried Sassoon, Wilfred Owen. But he would literally sometimes throw the class, the book, that we're supposed to be reading from, across the room, and bring out something else, and we'd read from that, D.H. Lawrence, or some filthy poetry that had artistic merit. And one time he came in and he had a record player set up on his desk, and this was extraordinary. We'd never seen anything like this. Yeah. And there's the usual sort of chuckling and uncomfortable noises. And he just waited for us all to settle down. And then he didn't say anything. He just put on a record. And he played Bob Dylan. Mm-hmm. Didn't say anything. Let it play to the end. Put that off. Put it on the Beatles, Eleanor Rigby, and then he told us to take out our Dylan Thomas books and go to a certain page. And then he said, before we start reading this chapter, I just want you to understand the connection here. That the first record I played was by Bob Dylan, and the second one was by the Beatles. And the Beatles were very influenced by Bob Dylan, especially in their lyrics. And without the gentleman who wrote the book that you're about to read, Bob Dylan would not have influenced the Beatles in the way that he did, because Dylan was influenced by Dylan Thomas and probably named himself after Dylan Thomas. And so there's a connection here. And this just completely brought literature to life for me. And then I read Dylan Thomas, and I read it through new eyes, you know.
I mean, you're so fortunate. That's similar to the kind of experience I had in 10th grade. A creative writing teacher introduced us to E. Cummings and more contemporary poets, and it completely changed my whole perception of what poetry could be, and that it wasn't this stodgy thing that I couldn't relate to, but it had all these different textures and meanings. So yeah, that is the big difference. I think if you have the right teacher in high school, it can make a big difference.
Yeah.
And throwing away the standard, things that have been done a million times is the first place to start. Not that they're not good, but they may not be as relatable.
Yeah. And my best friend in that class, Dave Exton, who later became the guitarist in my first punk band, he was a very smart kid, very intelligent, but a bit of a rebel. And he turned me on to Rimbaud and Baudelaire when we were like 15, 16. And he was very influential, and also Leonard Cohen. And then Patti Smith came along.
Yeah.
And she was referencing Rimbaud. And that sort of really kind of added a splash of more color to those French symbolists. And I saw connections there, with rock and roll and those poets. And that was really exciting.
Well, that's a perfect setup for my next question. It's almost as though I scripted it knowing what you're going to say, but your lyrics frequently have a storytelling quality, reminding me at times of Bob Dylan. When I was writing these questions, that's what came to mind. Bound for Hell from the self-titled Love and Rockets album is one of many examples. You wrote, "The engine with human blood was damp. The headlight was her brimstone lamp. And then for fuel I shoveled in bones, and the furnace roared with 1,000 groans." Love that. The song is so rich with imagery driven by story. What are your sources of inspiration, and how do you approach blending personal experiences with pure invention and mixing them all up?
Okay, well, that is a case of appropriation, really.
Okay.
Because that is basically it's an American ballad from the 19th century. I had a book of American ballads I was really taken with that I picked up on tour once, and that is one of those. And I elaborated upon it,
yeah.
And like the first part of that piece is my own invention, and it was written to lead into the already conceived and written American ballad. I changed a few little lines here and there, but that is, that's an unusual case there of that kind of appropriation.
Poets are the original remixers. Poets are the original remixers before sampling and everything else. Sure.
Especially with like ballads, because ballads, that's a form that has been handed down for decades and decades, and that's how it keeps alive, by being cast in a contemporary light, and it shows, it's testament to the strength and the power and the potency of that original form, the ballad.
Yeah, it's a very powerful poetic structure. Actually, Dana Gioia, who I interviewed recently, former poet laureate of California, was trying to find a way to tell this story of his relatives, and he ended up writing a ballad because it got it across in the most simple, straightforward, and a way with a ton of momentum built into the way the ballad structure is formed. Terrific for setting the music.
Yeah, yeah. For me, something that kind of lit my imagination was Froggy Goes a Courtin', which is a kind of ballad.
Yeah.
Traditional folk tale, you know. And there was something about that, the lyricism of that. I was very young when I heard that, like 8, you know. All these things, they just all seep in.
Yeah, especially if you get them early enough, then they plant a seed that if it's later, it can still be planted, but it's much harder.
Yeah.
So I've had a couple of my poems set to music and a couple others transformed into short films, but in those cases, the poems were basically left unchanged, and then the artists that I was working with reinterpreted them. I'm fascinated by the crafting of lyrics into songs, something I have not done directly, how the lyrics influence the music, how the music influences the lyrics. How do you approach getting the balance right between the lyrics and the music? Because ultimately the song structure has to succeed in the end.
Well, with me, it's nearly always the case that the lyrics come first, and usually in a burst, like a dam burst, and it just comes out in the flow. Quite often, the first line will dictate the kind of meter and the flow of it, the rhythm, and I just go run with that, and then I have that form, and then I'll pick up a guitar. Very rarely a piano, sit down at the piano, and it's the form of the lyric that really dictates the form of the music, the structure, and it's very easy for me to add the music once I've got the lyric down, and then it's a matter of going back and honing the lyrics, just burnishing.
So maybe drill in a little bit on that burnishing. What are the things that need to change to make it, the types of things that need to change to make it work as a song that you may only discover when you've started introducing music?
Sometimes you can change the tense, so it's like past tense becomes present, future, or it can be the little words in sentences, the, but, or then. You know, the little words that influence the context.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? There's little subtleties. That's what I mean by like honing it.
So on this whole topic of revising and tweaking and getting it just right, how do you learn from the way audiences respond to your songs, to the extent that they're singing along with you, to what they respond to, what they don't respond to? I realize it's different than like a stand-up comedian will take a year to hone a set, and they're working the same jokes and throwing them in and taking them out and modifying them. But there's a lot of work leading up to a tour where the album's been cut, so there's a version of it that's kind of been locked in, and there isn't as much of that. Maybe a new song gets sprinkled into the thrill of audiences here and there. But it's not workshopped with the audience in the same way that a poem is workshopped or a comedian. So do you learn anything from the way audiences respond to music that you can actually do anything about?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, a song that comes to mind that's a good example of this is one called Goth Girls in Southern California.
Yeah.
And I recorded that very quickly after writing it. And it has evolved since that recorded version. And I've for several years, I played a lot of house gigs, so living room concerts, literally in people's living rooms, very intimate, and I love doing those shows. Mm-hmm. And of course, have a very intimate connection with the audience, and you can hear the most subtle reactions, you know. And what I really love is a titter and if not a hearty guffaw. It's funny, you're talking about a stand-up comedian, but I like to get the laughs, you know, and I do like sprinkle a lot of these songs with little witticisms, and that's a good example. I mean, it has a comedic element to it, let's say, And so I would sometimes in the spur of the moment change a line, and I'd get a reaction, a noticeable, like a laugh, and I think, oh yeah, that works. So then that would become the new fixed lyric. And I have gone back and in some cases re-recorded songs because they've mutated so much. There's a song called Crocodile Tears and the Velvet Cars, which really mutated, and originally that was a bit of a put-down song directed at somebody else, but then I didn't really feel comfortable with that later on, so I changed it into the opposite, and it was self-reprimanding, and I like that form. And I also felt more comfortable with that form, the self-deprecation, so I am the bête noire, of the subject. And then it became, that song became both somebody else and myself. Then it went all the way around to how it originally started, but with different lyrics. So that's a good example of a song mutating over the years.
So that's fascinating. So it sounds like that if it is possible to do, a song can really benefit from getting tested in front of an audience, a real audience, maybe not a stadium audience, before it gets locked in, and find ways to do that. Yeah.
And with that song that I mentioned first, the Goth Girls in Southern California, how that came about was that I had a guitar. I had an endorsement deal with Taylor Guitars in San Diego, and they'd given me a couple of guitars, and one of them, I had a problem with one of the guitars, so they were setting that up for me, and I had to go down to pick up that guitar. So I was driving down, approaching their workshop, and I saw, it was a blazing summer's day in San Diego, and I saw this very cute goth girl with a black parasol, with funereal garb and a little Orient, funeral dress and little booties, and from the back, it was just so sort of charming. And there's the whole notion of, that I see this a lot. And that title came to me, Goth Girls in Southern California. And then I was just kind of on fire with that idea. And when I got into Taylor Guitars, my guitar wasn't ready. They said, it's going to be about half an hour. Here's the guitar, amuse yourself. So in the green rooms, so I just sat down and I wrote this song. I wrote that lyrics out, and the music came. By the time I got my guitar back, the song was done. Then I recorded it a couple of days later. So that's an example of that flash of inspiration.
Yeah. And I've had that feeling too, where a poem just falls out of me, and I must have been cooking on it subconsciously for a while, and it just was ready to be taken out of the oven, and then poof, here you go. Yeah. So my Gen Z younger daughter is joining me for the upcoming Love and Rockets show in Oakland at the iconic Fox Theater. If you haven't performed there, it's an incredible theater. And I'm going to see you guys tomorrow. I'm recording this the day before Cruel World, which will be fantastic. Yes. It didn't take much convincing to get my younger daughter to come along when I connected the dots from Love and Rockets to Bauhaus, and I gave her a playlist covering a subset of your extraordinarily rich catalog. She had a question that she wanted me to ask, which is, how do singer-songwriters perform very personal songs night after night without losing it on stage? Or maybe if it's a song that isn't, something you have a really tight personal connection to, how do you keep the energy and emotion in the performance without the emotion overwhelming the performance? Or the other way around, you've just sung it so many times, you're just sick of it, but you have to pretend you're not.
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's a matter of mentally tapping into where you were at when you wrote that song. Sometimes I take the original lyric sheets around with me, and it's things about those sheets, like a coffee stain, or just the way I wrote a word and crossed one word out and wrote another word. That is a mnemonic device that brings back very readily, to a degree, where I was when I wrote the song. So if I'm feeling like it's slipping away, I'll just pull them out of the folder and just like study that for a while, and it comes back. It's very evocative, of that state. Other times it's just a matter of mentally doing that, just thinking back to why you wrote that song. And also it can change. I mean, the context of a song can change, so that originally it was personal. You could have a conversation with somebody who has taken this song and made their own interpretation of it, or applied it to some experience they were going through, and they tell you this story. Mm-hmm. So a fresh experience to draw on. You think of that, and that keeps it alive. So there's different ways of keeping the songs alive.
Well, the song, I want to switch in a different direction now. The songs, The Unreliable Narrator, Sacred Monster, on the Night Crickets album, and the song Mosaic from the album Missive to an Angel from the Halls of Infamy and Allure, you're terrific at titles, by the way, are examples of spoken word poetry backed by an instrumental track. What was it about these lyrics that worked better as spoken word backed by music? How did that choice happen?
It becomes very obvious. And again, it's the form really dictating the method. And it's not something I have to really think about or, mull over. It's just very obvious to me. Oh, this needs a spoken word interpretation or performance, or to get it across, it's very clear. Sometimes you get a song where you've got a section that's spoken word and the rest is sung. But again, it's just really obvious to me what the form should be.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's in the category of questions that I ask other poets in the podcast, or people ask me, where it's hard to put my finger on it. You just know from enough experience and intuition what it needs.
Yeah, it's more intuition than anything else.
Well, as a poet, collections of poems are typically written over years. Each poem's written as a standalone piece of art, usually, not always, but usually. Finding a way to turn individual poems into a cohesive book happens after the poems are written. You have to kind of figure out how to put them together. When writing lyrics, what role does the band you're writing for play? The expectations of the band's sound, the expectations of the fans? How does that play in crafting the lyrics? And what role does the album you are creating the lyrics and the songs for play in this mix of creating a unified thing? And I still love albums, and I hope the album as a concept never goes away, even though the physical form, whether it's vinyl or CDs, is, although vinyls has come way back, clearly. But that concept of a contiguous block of things that fits together in some way. So talk to me about how you think about that.
Well, really, it doesn't, it's not an imposition on the material. The material just comes. Mm-hmm. And once it's there, or even when it's in the process of becoming, it becomes very clear what its ultimate destination will be, whether that's a solo record or with a band, and which band.
Yeah.
Maybe it's something completely new and I have to find the band, which I have done many times just for that session, So it all comes from the form. I don't sit down and think, I'm going to write a song for Love and Rockets. I just write something.
Yeah.
Oh, that could work with Love and Rockets, or that's obviously Love and Rockets, or this is a solo thing. This is very personal, so that's the answer.
Yeah. So it's interesting. So once you've written them, they may naturally slot into one thing or another, or some new thing. Is that kind of how Night Crickets came to be, as an example of that?
Well, Night Crickets came about, due to the pandemic, we were all in different locations, and we wanted to work together. And we, as an experiment, we tried a couple of tracks which really, really came together very quickly and very well, and we decided to carry on. And we would just take turns in trading files. and just keep that going until we all agreed that the track was done. And with that, with my lyrical input for that, it's a bit different to I've worked in the past, in that it was usually very spontaneous and down to like the day of the session or the day before, and it was just scraps of bits and pieces lying around, just notes, half-written lyrics, newspaper headlines, newspaper articles, stuff I'd overheard on on TV, on the radio. So a real sort of a bit of a montage, in effect, came into play there, and it just felt right for that project.
Love and Rockets has created some extraordinarily beautiful songs, and I think one of the things I really enjoy about that project in particular is the way it combines such distinct styles, and likely that's because you and Daniel, who I spoke to, have very distinct and different ways of approaching things. Some beautiful song examples that immediately come to mind: Rainbird from Earth, Sun, Moon. The poetry, the melodies, the sound structures, the whole way it's crafted really is magical. And you wrote, Rainbird swoops through the chimney pots and Rainbird flies to the edge of a gilded cage, hiding in the spotlights of a famous stage. He tries to become invisible whilst stealing the front page. I think in particular, you truly write things that are standalone poems, whereas there are some lyrics that in the absence of the music, they've lost quite a bit. Clearly as I'm reading that, I'm immediately thinking of the music, and they're inseparable. At the same time, though, I think if I saw the lyrics by themselves, they would be really rich. So talk about how you approach the sound, and especially these songs that are so hauntingly beautiful. I mean, just where that comes from, knowing that that's not really answerable in any concrete way.
That song I wrote about Daniel, reticence over wanting to carry on and make music, which it has been the case for years and still is. And we'd made 2 albums with Love and Rockets, and it was successful. And he had cold feet about doing the 3rd album for various reasons. And so I wrote that song when we didn't even know if we were going to make a 3rd album, and it was about him. And I only told him that it was about him once we made the album.
Maybe a way to think about it is the emotion of like that. It's just such a beautiful, there's an maybe when you write a lyric, does an emotion get attached to it, and that emotion then translates into the style and the type of music? It's that connection of dots I find so fascinating.
Yeah, always. Yeah. So, yeah. And as I say, I usually write the lyric and then I'll immediately pick up the guitar and write the music. And it's very rare that music doesn't come.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So you have to see that the lyric is very fresh. It's newly conceived, and it's very readily present in my consciousness. So that consciousness goes into what I play on the guitar, and the way I won't think, I won't think what I'm doing. I won't think about, that chord could work with this. I just start moving my hands over the fretboard, and sometimes I'll quite often I'll tune the guitar differently, put it into an open tuning, and that's really random. Mm-hmm. And my pure instinct, and I'll just be tuning something, the E down and the A up, and until it's all over the place, and I'm just like, I don't know what I'm going for really, but I'll know when I hear it. Yeah. And I just keep doing that until there's something there. I hear that inside the guitar. I'm gonna fish that out, and I just like fine tune it. Then I'll have this weird open tuning, and then I'll just play with that. And then a nice thing about that is when you've got an open tuning, because what happens is that the chord shapes no longer make sense, because I know what those chord shapes should sound like, but you're making the same shapes. It sounds completely different because the tuning is different. So that makes the whole process very fresh again. And I no idea what these chords are called, if they are called anything. But I just know when I'm playing the right chord. And I mean, like that song Rainbow, that's a very unusual rhythm as well. I've never played that rhythm before. It's quite a hard kind of hard little rhythm to play that, especially when singing it at the same time. It's weird, but that just came out, you know, and those chords came out, and it felt right. I can't explain.
I mean, this symbiotic, what I'm taking from this, and it's different than from other songwriters I've spoken to, this symbiotic relationship between the words and the music and the music and the words. That's really fascinating, as opposed to other bands where everyone comes in with riffs and then someone has a task of kind of, which they may not necessarily enjoy, of creating lyrics. Whereas for you, it seems like it's completely organic. Like the lyrics and the music, they just come together. Yeah. So a couple more questions. So while many Love and Rockets songs have individual credits for words, songs including It Could Be Sunshine, Hot Trip to Heaven, and My Drug have shared writing credits. In the situations where the writing credits for words is shared, is that because they're really two separate songs that have been combined, like A Day in the Life by the Beatles, which were truly two totally separate songs that just work so well together? Or is it because it's collaborative, or was there significant editorial input that justified the shared credit, or it's a mix of all those things?
Mix of all of those things. And there are some comparative examples of Love and Rockets songs, you know, that you can compare to the Beatles process of dovetailing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, think of Haunted, When the Minutes Drag. That was one of those where Daniel and I literally turned up to rehearsals with half a song each, and we were both very keen to do our songs, you know, to bring our songs to the band. We put those two sheets down on a table, and I remember looking at them and thinking, no, these could work, you know. And then we just all started playing. That's the way we would always work when we work sometimes we would come to the band with the chords, you know, a kind of structure. I did that with Dog End of a Day Gone By. It's pretty much there, but then the band gets onto it and it mutates, you know, it becomes a band thing. But with that Haunted, there was no music, and we just sort of started playing, and we didn't even decide who was going to go first. But I imagined my lyric going with this kind of chugging thing that we were doing. And I just started singing that lyric, you know. The word that would best describe this feeling. And it just fit perfectly. And we all look at each other and nod. And then we just continued with that. And then we sort of got to where's this going to go? So then Daniel got the acoustic, and he said, I've got this thing out. I haven't finished it yet, but there's this thing. This could work. And then he starts playing that, and then try singing that lyric with it, you know. And he does, and immediately there's a connection. Now, okay, so we all pick up the bass, and Kevin's just on the drums, and we tried as a band, and it's very organic, mm-hmm. like you say, how things come together. Other cases, it'll be either myself or Daniel who would have written most of the lyric, and then the other guy chimes in and changes something here, and you have to be very open-minded and not too possessive about it.
Yeah.
For it to be a successful collaboration, of course. But when that process happens, then it's, you're just recognizing the input.
Well, what advice do you have for emerging musicians and bands or established bands that struggle with writing lyrics, where it's a task versus a joy? And and maybe your starting point from the earlier discussion you had such a rich, not indoctrination, a rich exposure to diverse forms of poetry that it just opened up your mind really early, and not everybody has that. They may not have had that really early on. What advice do you have for bands that struggle with lyrics but maybe doing everything else really well?
Get somebody in the band who's into it.
Yeah.
Force it.
Yeah.
And that if that's the case, that they're really struggling, that's telling you something. It's telling you that to be a lyricist. Get a lyricist. Doesn't even have to be somebody who's in the band. It's just somebody who can write lyrics, and I know that's an unusual situation, but not totally out of the question. Look at Bernie Taupin,
Right, yeah.
Just a lyricist. somebody who writes lyrics. That's what I say.
I'm now going to pass the mic over to David, who will read lyrics from an upcoming project.
I've made an album of spoken word poetry that's going to be released probably at the end of this year.
Oh, exciting. Fantastic.
And called Rakir, who are based here in LA, amazing musicians. Rakir is spelled Raqia. And it's acoustic guitar, acoustic piano, and violin. And we did these recordings very spontaneously. I would send them a sheet of the poem that we were about to do, and then the day before the session, and then we wouldn't rehearse it, and we just go in, and then they would play me something, just like a bit of what they were going to do to see if it was in the right ballpark, and it always was. And then we just record, and I do the vocal with them live, and we do it in one take. And we have a whole album of this. It's going to be called The Mother Tree. And The Mother Tree is a very long poem that takes up a whole side of vinyl. And that's a song I wrote for my mother a couple of days after she died. That's the centerpiece, if you will. But then there were these other pieces. This one I wrote the first time I went to Memphis. And it was an impression. It's called Elegy for Beale Street. Ghosts of cotton pickers moaning low on a fragrant breeze that mingles with a thick stench of cooking fat, clinging grease from 1,000 low-rent grills and diners. Street musicians howling on the corner of Handy Park, as they did in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, even in the 70s and 80s when the wrecking ball moved in. Gob iron and green bullet clasped like a precious thing, and French kissed for tips for the hell of it, as if in prayer. More ghosts crowding in. Robert Johnson, young and handsome, brilliant and doomed. Fury Lewis, Memphis Slim, Memphis Willie B, Son House, Sleepy John Estes, Blind Blake, Sonny Boy Williamson, all ghosts now, crowding in. Hard toil and sweet salvation, wood and steel and sweat, a sawn-off bottleneck for a slide, a guitar made from a cigar box, chicken wire and nails. This music needed like food and drink, substance for souls beaten down and bleeding. Warm southern nights of old times, jazz spilling out, mixed with profanity and laughter from the holy bars on Beale. Card sharps, quick as lizards, making their killing play. Bruised angel whores, presided over by bear men in razor-sharp attire. Cops turning a blind eye, unless it was election time. Pee-wee Saloon, where everything happened nightly. Where W.C. Handy invented sheet music and the craps game never died. Gone, all gone now. And you have to look hard beyond the new neon in order to see the thing that it once was. But something of the soul remains. That flame was a fierce and burning, blazing light. That flame was a fierce and blazing light.
Oh, wonderful. Wonderful. And that reminds me of an experience I had last year where we had this intense go into a museum, write some poetry. A week later, clean it up a little bit. And then we did a performance where there was a jazz duo and they didn't get to see the poem at all. I just got to whisper in their ear 10 seconds before the gist of the poem is this. And then I started reading and they improvised. And it was the most amazing experience. So it's a more extreme version of what you just described. Yeah, it's really magical when you don't have that much time you don't have any time to think about it. You just do.
Yeah, well, I'm a great believer in that. So that's one of the pieces. And of course, you know, it has the context of the music, which is great. I mean, it has this really kind of bluesy, moody piano part. And I play a harmonica on it. And so it's... that album's going to be out, as I say, hopefully later in the year. And it's going to be, we're trying to time it to coincide with the publication of my book of poems.
Oh, I was going to ask. I mean, I'm so excited for that to happen. I'm really excited to see your book. Have you done that before, or is this your first collection? I didn't think so. I was looking, and I'm pretty sure I hadn't missed it. So I am so excited for that.
Yeah, and they go back to the early 80s, up to a couple of years ago. And you said about, the process of putting together something like that. It's sort of comparing it to sequencing an album.
Yeah.
And it is like that, but it was interesting although those poems were written over decades, there's a certain cohesion there that can be pinpointed by the sequence, by I didn't do it chronologically, I did it thematically.
Yeah.
How one track rubbed up against the next track.
And now, did you every poet I talked to, including myself, that you end up printing out all the poems and you put them out on a family room floor or a big space and manipulate them in space because it's hard to do it digitally, and other people put up Post-it notes on walls with just a reminder of the poem and find a way to and stare at it for weeks and weeks and weeks and move it around.
Yeah. And it reveals itself.
Yeah, it does. The pattern is there. You just have to keep playing with it. Well, I am really excited for these two projects. And yes, hopefully they line up at the same time because they sound like they'll complement each other.
Well, I must mention another project as well. That's
sure.
Connected with all of this, because again, it's spoken word. And this is an album. It's all finished. We're going to start shopping it around, and it's the project is there's three of us: Richard Ellis and his wife Sheila Ellis, who are in a wonderful band called Annabelle Lee.
Mm-hmm.
Big musicians. Sheila's a wonderful singer, and Richard is a guitarist, composer. But they're both poets, and myself. And we have this project called Fugue State. And it has a particular mood to it. It's very different to the Mother Tree, because that's all acoustic and natural instruments. But this is more, there's an electronic element to it.
Mm-hmm.
Visors, programmed music, with some, I play bass on it, my fretless bass, and some classical guitar. So it's a real sort of combination of elements. But that's another, it's a strong spoken word record.
No, I think it's really, really cool to hear spoken word set over music. It just brings something out of the poetry in such a different way. It's just really, really cool. Lisa Marie Simmons is a wonderful singer, songwriter, jazz musician who I interviewed last year, and she intersperses spoken word with like more traditional and modern jazz, and it's just wonderful to hear that mix of sounds. So
yeah, of course, music is an intensifier.
Yes,
it's the intensifier. That's really what it's for. And when you align it with poetry, then it really comes into its own and its essence.
Absolutely. Well, David, I know you got a bunch of concerts this weekend, which I'm going to be enjoying both of them, and I really appreciate you taking the time right before all that. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, and I look forward to all of these upcoming projects that you've shared today.
I love this because it's right up my alley.
The Viewless Wings Poetry Podcast is written and produced by James Moorhead. You can follow me on Twitter at Dublin Ranch, subscribe to the Viewless Wings Poetry Podcast, and follow us on viewlesswings.com or on Instagram at Viewless Wings.